Yep, it's
Um,
four.
I just didn't want to hold the whole thing.
Anna,
I'm here.
you're there.
Hi. Yeah,
Hello.
I'm sorry. I'm on the move today, so
Don't
I'm
worry.
going to have to finish at 6 and catch up on a video.
Oh, okay, Dave. Yeah, no problem. So are you kind of just sort of listening in?
I can participate as best I can, but I'm on public transport, so it's a bit tough.
I
Best I can
will.
do.
I'll manage my expectation about your your
Thank
collaboration.
you.
It's slightly unfortunate because this session is a hugely collaborative one, but it doesn't matter because, like all the sessions, it's an introduction to a way of thinking around certain different business principles, and I just want to land a little bit of an appetite for you around it, and also open the door to showing that you're probably thinking in these ways already, and amplifying how important it is to be aware that you're thinking in innovative ways. Being a small business owner or an entrepreneur, it's impossible not to be innovative. We wouldn't be having this conversation if you weren't already. But it just means that I want to hear some of your thinking. Again, because there's just two of you, and because Anna's only going to be here for an hour, the session might not be as long as 2 hours, but let's see how much we can get through. I'm going to waive the 6-second pitch practice because I feel like we're here for a good time, not a long time. Let's get into it. But this session is about, and obviously it's useful to have for us to have that agreement around using our voices but owning our airtime and trying to stick to the subject at hand. If stuff comes out that deserves more conversation, let's have them separate. But let's make that first hour especially as useful as possible. So this session is about innovation, culture, and process. And what I mean by innovation, culture, and process is the atmosphere where innovation is richest, and then the tools that you can use to make sure that innovation is most useful. Does that make sense? Okay, good. And the first question that I'd really like to throw out there is, what is your understanding or articulation of what innovation is? And before you answer, know that there are so many interpretations. I'm just interested in what both of yours are. Anna?
Off the top of my head, but solving a problem, which probably involves working around a current situation that isn't delivering what you think it could.
Yeah, okay. So so it's problem solving.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah, okay. Love it. Tony?
I think it's finding new ways to do things, or new offerings. Like a iPod was innovation because you couldn't listen to music. I'm old enough, and music used to come. Very different. Walkmans were fine, but it really was an innovation to be able to have all of your music on one little thing. It's like being able to do it. It's maybe the same thing, but in a better way.
Yeah, I remember walking around with a portable CD player and it just constantly skipping, and just now thinking how clunky that was. But at the time, but I remember before CDs even existed. So that was SpaceX, your portable CD player. What's that all about? We definitely live in a world where where innovation in itself has moved on really, really quickly. And I read a study just before Brexit, which said that one of the UK's largest exports is innovation. And the context was that a lot of the funding for that comes from Europe and what would happen after Brexit. But the point is that we live in a very innovative culture, and modern technology has enabled a lot of that innovation. I'm glad you both said what you said, because innovation sometimes sits in the business mind as only a tech thing, and I want to broaden your thinking a bit more and be a bit less linear around It's just because we've just experienced the last sort of 30 years have been very innovation sat very comfortably in tech. We've seen lots of tech innovations, but actually the principles of how you think innovatively are much broader than that. You can have macro innovations and micro innovations. So you can have, so for the sake of our conversation, I'm going to articulate innovation as taking existing elements to create new answers. And when I say new, I mean, so the existing elements we've seen before, but the answer is new. And that's how you pull things forward. So in that context, you can have innovations around how you do your bookkeeping, and you can have innovations around how you disrupt the market around healthcare. Macro, micro, it's about how you think about the way you're going to come up with the solution. Am I going to cookie cutter it? Am I going to take it clean off the shelf? Or am I going to try and think further outside the box and bring two existing elements that have never been brought together before and create an innovation, essentially? To a certain extent, you're both doing that. And actually, that's one of the reasons why entrepreneurs and small business people are my heroes, because they are the heroes of our economy. They disrupt markets by creating new innovations and therefore creating new answers to questions we might not have even realized we were thinking about, which creates new jobs, new, as I say, new markets, new opportunities for society and culture and our economy to move forward in a healthy way. So what you're doing is no small thing, basically, in your own ways. It's no small thing. It's just sometimes about whether you've hit the zeitgeist around whether people are ready and have an appetite for this thing, or whether you can create an appetite. So I don't know if you both know that famous quote with Henry Ford, who created the Ford Model T motor car. And that was, he said, if I asked them, they'd have said faster horses. And I love that quote because it kind of sums up that there is an appetite out there, but people they're like, well, it can't be done. But what innovation does is take the challenge, take two things that haven't been put together before and answers the challenge. Which is why it can be so exciting, but also why if you Google innovation, you'll have 56 million responses. That's just the books on it. So I want to break it down to, like most things, it's naturally occurring. Let's try and be clear about it and not over-engineer it, and just kind of be so that it's accessible to whatever you do. What I would like to see both of you do when you're thinking about branding, when you're thinking about pitching and presenting, when you're thinking about negotiating and leadership and advertising, and when you're thinking about relationships and delegating, is to try and put an innovative spin on it. Because an innovative spin that matches with your branding, so that it becomes part of your branding, so people see what you're producing as bringing the story forward slightly. Does that make sense? Yeah. Good. I'm going to start with the culture part of innovation, because that's pretty much what I've been talking about. In a business or organization, who do you think's job it is to manage innovation? And that's open to either of you.
I think the owner.
So the person, the owner, founder, the person who's come up. Yeah. Okay.
Sort of steering the ship, according to resources and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tony, what do you think?
I think it depends on the structure of the organization. Like if, as the owner, if I had people working for me that would bring it on, I would want them to do it, and I'd be pleased that they did it. Having had the idea, I don't see it as being all mine necessarily. Maybe I wouldn't. Sometimes innovation's great when people are at the top of their game, but it's really annoying when they have to go through the process to recreate mistakes that you've already worked through.
Mm.
So I think you can't shut them down. They've got to find it out for themselves almost. If you tell them, I remember in photography doing this, and say I do it this way and it works fine. They go, wouldn't it be better if you did? And I'm like, oh, okay. And then they get 2 small steps down the line, and they're like, yeah, now I can't do this, can I?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
I bet you go back to the way we were doing it before, but you can't squash them, right?
Yeah, I feel like what you're talking about is about delivering a brief around
process, but they think they're innovating, whereas so it is awkward.
Well, they potentially are. I feel like so. There's the having the idea and there's the implementing idea. Do you both think that it's possible to innovate around both?
Well, yeah, because I've had to do it, but whether that's ideal, I don't know.
It's whether it's relevant, isn't it, and necessary.
It depends how much knowledge is shared within the organisation, really, and how much of the process is documented. Because yes, if you've kept good records of how you've done anything, which probably would not be me, they could be, you say, well, have you looked through the file of what we've tried and how it went, and then they'd have to go off recreating things that may be rabbit holes,
Yeah. So I think
it's not just for me, it's not just the owner, it's everyone. But it needs to be carefully managed.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much hit the nail on the head. Within an organization, and an organization can be just you, it could be 2 people, it could be 150 or more. If you want innovation to live in the choices of the business, so as I say, micro, macro innovations, if you want the story to always be brought forward, not to change it unnecessarily if it doesn't need it, but if it needs it to always grow faster than the market, then innovation is everyone's responsibility. And that message, to tie it back in with what Anna said, comes from the leader of the business. So as far as the messaging for it and the onus for it, comes from the leader. The person who amplifies its importance is the leader, but it's actually everyone within the organization's role in order to take some responsibility for it, because all of us are full of different connections that have never been put together before. We've all got a different frame of reference. A team of us have got more to draw from than one of us. And what you often find is corporate innovators. So I've just started a network in London for corporate innovators, because the corporate world is still quite slow to catch up on this, and they will make it one person's responsibility to get the whole business thinking in a fresh way. And they also will make it one person's responsibility to come up with amazing ideas and fresh thinking ideas, and then the people that approve those ideas don't know how to think in an innovative way and then kill them. So it's a self-fulfilling negative prophecy. So ultimately, if you're brands that don't innovate, it's because the leadership is not bought into the power of innovation and or don't know how to think in those terms. It's like we talked before about we'd still have Woolworths if they'd realized they should have innovated into being the pound shop at some certain point as a brand. So the key to this is what I'm going to articulate as expansive and reductive thinking. Have I mentioned this to you already? Expansive and reductive thinking.
No.
Okay, great, thank you. This language you can adapt to yourself, but for the sake of kind of traditional innovative principles, expansive thinking is creative yes and thinking, and reductive thinking is creative how-to thinking. So I'll say that again. Expansive thinking is creative yes and thinking, and reductive thinking is creative how-to thinking. So the first challenge that a lot of individuals or organizations have is to be absolutely clear about what type of thinking is going to be useful to this point of the innovation process. And when I say process, that can be whatever you do naturally. And I'm going to talk to you about design thinking in a minute. which is a potential innovative process. But just for the sake of this conversation, sometimes I'll go into organizations and I'll just make that point about the difference between expansive and reductive thinking in their meetings, and it's transformative immediately, something really simple as that. Because what you'll have in an expansive meeting, so an idea generation session, is you'll have naturally expansive and reductive thinkers with no clarity around which one of those types of thinking is useful. We can all do both, but some of us just sit more naturally in one or the other. And you'll know what this is like, because we've either done it ourselves or we've been in meetings where you're trying to come up with ideas and someone will go, no, that won't work because we've done it before and it didn't work. Or that won't work, we haven't got any money to do that. What an expansive thinker will do is they'll go, right, how do we have impact with no money? Or they'll be like, right, we did it before, it didn't work. What did we learn? What's changed since then? What was going on at that time? How can we take those learnings and build to a new solution? Because it's a creative thinking process. And equally, you'll be in a meeting where it needs to be a reductive meeting, which is creative making, kind of how to. And you'll have somebody going, and everyone will be sitting around thinking, right, what budget have we got? What timeline do we need? What tools and resources do we have to make this idea happen? And there'll be somebody else going, oh, I've got another idea. Again, completely inappropriate, not useful to that stage of the process. So it's really important for just in yourself or with whoever you're collaborating with to be really clear in whatever language makes most sense to you, what type of thinking is most useful to the part of the process that you're talking about. Is it ideas? So we need to be really expansive and not, I call it, don't be a butthead. But if you hear, when you're in an expansive part of a process and you hear yourself say, before you speak it, think, how can I answer that but with an expansive push? Because it's the expansive push that pushes you out of your cyclical thinking into somewhere new, which is where you're making those new connections. And that's what makes it innovative. And there's that whole cliche in innovation, which is there's no such thing as a bad idea, which we're all adults and we know that's absolute rubbish. Of course, there are bad ideas. But what's worse than having a bad idea is killing an idea before it's had a chance to evolve, and then not picking bits out of that later on. Because if you don't give yourself a chance to expansively push into an innovative place, you're never going to be able to take some of that stuff back reductively into being able to make it happen. And you'll just do the same things over and over and over again. Does that make sense to both of you?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like if you tell somebody an idea and they haven't really got it and then they shut it down.
Yeah.
You almost can't get excited about that idea, even though they didn't properly understand it. It's still knocked a bit corner off of it or something.
Yeah, the challenge comes when you're managing people around this, is that, as I said, that some people are naturally reductive thinkers and some people are naturally expansive thinkers, but they rarely have awareness of one or the other. And they can be in jobs that celebrate that, and they're still not really clear that, because I've just put language on it, but equally you could put the language of ideas people and doing people. And it's not, you're not that type of person. You just naturally think that way. It could be the way you're brought up, it could be the way your brain is positioned. I find if I go into train or do an idea generation session with finance people or IT people, I've got a room full of really bright, reductive thinkers. And I have to try and work really hard to get them into an expansive place. And equally, if I go into a marketing agency, getting those people to shut up and make something happen could be just a challenge. Not impossible, but absolutely, because we're all capable of both. But the thing that step changes that thinking is being clear about which is relevant and when. And just to be clear again, both of those types of thinking are creative. They're equally as creative as each other. One might be more fun than the other, but ultimately, it takes just as much creative thinking to think with no money and little resources, how are we going to make the impact of this fantastic idea that someone's given me happen, as it does for someone to go, we want this impact, and we've got this audience we want to speak to, and this is how well we know that audience. How can we really rock their world? the two things are just as creative as each other, different sorts of creative thinking, but just as creative as each other. And if you're going to manage people, other people, and yourself in that process, it's really important to listen to how you're thinking and how other people are talking, and say right from the top, using your own language. So this is going to be an expansive conversation, or this is a conversation where I want us to really push creatively and not edit ourselves. And if we find a challenge or a block, how can we creatively push past it? We're going to have fun with this. We're not going to worry about the results. We'll do that later. And then when you're in a reductive place, saying, right, this is about taking what we've got and making magic happen, making these magical ideas happen. What is realistically possible from the ideas that we've got? Because if you try and do both, they cancel each other out.
Yeah.
It's quite a spicy discipline, but with a bit of practice, you end up being a master at it, and it's actually can be really, really fun. Even when you've got a challenge in the business, which is how do we streamline our accounts? I had a job once I talked to you about the Nike Girl Hub, and I came into them and had another job with them, and they had this thing called the Log, and the Log was a place where everyone who was associated with their organization, and the Girl Hub, just to remind you, was they use Nike resources and local government money to create to support education for girls in developing countries, part of the foundation. And so the Log was an exciting thing. Everyone associated with the foundation and developments and achievements and learnings and resources around how to promote education for girls in developing countries went into this Log. But the Log was an Excel document. And the challenge they said to me was, Doug, how do we get people using this document more? So I ran a session, an innovation session, idea generation innovation session on how to get people engaged in the Log. And it was all about repositioning it, the comms messaging about it, about celebrating it more, about getting people emotionally engaged with the information that was held in it, all those things. And then they had to go away and then implement that, which was another session. It was a reductive session. Any questions before I move on to the next bit?
No, I had an experience working with somebody before who did a lot of the expansive thinking, and I didn't understand quite how kind of ferocious or basically this guy, he was a serial entrepreneur, and he would come up with an idea and he would actually want to do it.
Yeah.
Even if it was completely, just to find out what you'd learn.
Yeah.
And to find out what true, you think you know what's true and what's not true. And I didn't understand this process till way later.
Yeah.
But that's, interesting when you've got the you've got the thinking part, the expansive part, and you're really scared that you'll make a mistake, but which is where all the the reductive thinking comes in. But actually, what have you lost? Morning.
Yeah, and do you know what's really interesting is so two things. Is that people are often their self-esteem, professional self-esteem is often very tightly wound into their ability to be expansive or reductive, whether they articulate it like that as well. They just think, I'm the person that can come in and make amazing ideas happen, or I'm the person that takes control and makes, I'm the responsible one, whatever language they use. So you do have to tread carefully, but I actually think when you explain it out to people in ways which is clear and simple, it's actually quite a freeing concept that we all think in both those ways, and they both have value. It's just about when to do.
Right.
It's all right. Right. Anna, have you got any comments on that before I move on to the next bit?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Cool. So I wanted to to talk about design thinking a little bit. Do either of you have an experience of design thinking, or heard that term before, or have an articulation for what it is?
Well, I worked with a designer to create my product,
Great,
and it was in different stages with lots of feedback in between. But
great.
we had a vision to begin with and shared that all the way through.
Yeah, perfect. So that essentially is a version of a design thinking process, because essentially, I mean, if you Googled it, you're going to get 120 responses as well. But put simply, design thinking is following a process when you're designing a product or service in really simple terms. So design thinking is following a process when you're developing a product or service. And it can be any process, essentially, but there are some that are more effective depending on what product or service you're working on. And there are some that are more effective depending on who you can work with and their ability to be reductive or expansive at any point, essentially, including yourself. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to explain to you a very rudimentary design thinking process. And I just want to be really clear about any process that anyone talks to you about is to fall back on if you're not being as resiliently productive as you want to be. So if it's not happening naturally, then there's a process to fall back on. If you don't have a lot of time and you're trying to get lots of people on board quickly, a process can be really useful because it's an aligned piece of language. I'm not suggesting that you follow any process that I talk about blindly and ignore your instincts if they're working better. So a design thinking process, for example, is the first part of the process would be insight gathering. So say, for example, you've noticed, you've got a sense that there's a gap in the market for something. The first thing you do is gather insights about that to find out whether it's true or not. And you have to watch yourself for what's called a confirmation bias. And a confirmation bias is essentially looking for evidence that only supports the thing that you believe. And so the reason that you do, this is where a lot of sometimes entrepreneurs can make real mistakes, because they just have an urge and then just do it, just like you were saying, Tony. But what it does is it checks your hunch. And it says, actually, is this a business? Is this a viable question? Who else is potentially in this space? How are they answering it? Do I have a unique perspective? You know, we talked about pitching and presenting, there being a slide in your deck which says, what is the challenge I'm answering and how am I doing it in a unique way? That will come out of you doing some research and insight gathering. And I say insight gathering because that can involve all sorts of different types of learning. So yes, there's research here that you can do. There's quantitative and qualitative research. So there's data you can gather. There's stories that you can gather. Talking to people, you are a person. Why is this instinct popped up in you that this could be potentially a gap in the market or something that you could add unique value to? Essentially, what you're doing is you're gathering dust to build matter. To a certain extent, it's a bit like, I sometimes think of it a bit like a huge box of random Lego, and you're just chucking it all out on the carpet, and you're looking at it thinking, right, have I got a certain amount of blocks here, and what does that making me think I could build, or et cetera, et cetera. So you're raking through all of the information out there to see if you can build some kind of platforms that you could have ideas off of. The first stage is insight gathering. The next stage is idea generation. And idea generation is exactly that, is creating a structure so that you can have ideas. So it's a very expansive part of the process. You could say that the insight gathering is a reductive part, because you're not building on ideas, you're collecting information that's already there. And that will make you have ideas, but that's the next stage of the process. And again, don't ever let the process get in the way of the point. What's probably happened is you've had an idea and now you're testing it with some research. And throughout any design thinking process, ideas will pop up because we're human beings and that's what we do. And all ideas are potential gold, but you have to capture them in a way which keeps them out of your head so that you can focus on this process. And I'll give you an example. You could be thinking, I want to I've got a new restaurant idea or a new cafe idea. Maybe it's a portable cafe idea. And it's about a certain kind of, maybe it's a vegan portable cafe idea. I know a lot about that kind of food. I see a trend for it. Let's test to see if that's true. Then you have ideas, go through the other parts of the design thinking process. You might start having other ideas around, oh, there's a particular type of vegan food which I think you could post to people and they could just so you're developing. So again, capture that idea, put it down so you can go back to focusing on the one that you had first of all and work on one idea at a time. So never lose any ideas, because as we said before, yes, there is such a thing as a bad idea, but they all have elements in them that could be useful. Doesn't matter how ridiculous they might be, they all have potential elements. So I would capture all your ideas, and I'll talk about idea capture again in a minute. So first process is what did I say? Insight gathering. The second part of the process is idea generation. The third part of the process is probably the most important, insofar as it's the thing that needs, it's reductive, because we've gone reductive, expansive, reductive. It's the bit that evidences some of what you're thinking about, and that's the prototyping part. Did either of you have a prototyping stage in your businesses?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
And how long did that stage look like, Anna?
About 18 months.
Wow, okay. So did you create prototypes and then test it with different markets or something like that?
In different environments.
Different environments, great. So you tested the durability and the functionality of it, whether it's fit for purpose. Yeah, Tony.
And fabrics, yeah.
Yeah, great. Tony, what about you?
Yeah, certain parts are provided to me, and then other parts have been tested with sort of live streams and
right.
Yeah, and some part of it is yet to be developed. So it's a mixture of different things, finished products and additional products, and additional things.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So
yeah, I mean, I need a developer basically.
So moving forward, when you think about prototyping, I want you to think about three things, and that is cheap, low risk, full of learnings. So wherever possible, moving forward, whenever you've got a thought or an idea, and it can be a micro innovation or a macro one, it can be a product or a service relating to your existing business or anything else. If you get to a prototyping stage, I want you to see how if you can do it for as little amount of money as possible. If you can make it as low risk as possible, it's never going to be no money, it's never going to be no risk, but as little risk as possible and as maximizing as learning as possible. So how can you do it in a way where you can get loads of new, more sophisticated insight because you've gone backwards, forwards. And also how many the prototyping stage for some businesses can last years, depending on
I probably don't, to some extent, don't need to do it. It's really building custom versions for different markets. That's what it will be. So it'll be a case of trialing it and adapting it, because it's software, so it's the templates can be altered. So
it could be for you, Tony. It could be something about say you're going to create a marketing strategy. You could run your marketing strategy through a design thinking process, and the design thinking process can last a day. It can last years, depending on what you're working on. It's just about having something to anchor you into focus on various areas to make sure that what's produced has the best chance of survival.
Makes loads of sense.
So the next stage I'd call it the polish. So that's where you've done your insight gathering. Off the back of that, you've had some relevant ideas. So ideas off the back of you've recognized some evidence, some platforms. You're having ideas around focused on those platforms. You've created a prototype which you've used. Hasn't cost you loads of money. It hasn't been a huge risk. You've got loads of learning from it. It's answered lots of questions for you. And then you take all that learning and you polish your product or service based on that, so that it's now as fit for purpose as you can possibly make it without showing it to a market and getting an honest response. And then the final process would be launch. And and interestingly, that's what we started with on last week when we talked about branding. So I've designed these sessions to run backwards, just like we did with the master deck, pitch deck, one pager. This is the kind of thinking that you start with, and then you finish with the comms bit. So with all of that foundational thinking, if you've gone through a design thinking process or whatever process for design thinking that makes sense to you, you've already got a lot of those answers. You've heard from your market because you prototyped it, or you've heard from a market. So you've prototyped it. You've seen the things that people were challenged by, that they really get excited by. So you've already built a lot of insight around relationship because your prototype has worked or has fed you insight. Tony, you look like you're in pain.
Yeah, brilliant. No, it's really making sense. Yes, of course. To apply this to the marketing, of course, that's genius.
Well, it's business. Yeah, it's like, it's not my own work. It's just my own articulation.
No. But it gets around that whole problem of, anyway, things we discussed previously.
Yeah, and it's. And you can do a design thinking process retroactively. And actually, it's quite an interesting thing to do when you're doing the bare bones of your sort of master deck, your business Bible, because you can go, what did I do in that stage? And often some businesses will retroactively, they'll go for insights that create a confirmation bias around the thing that they've tested as a prototype. So they do know it works. And also things change, things move on, new awarenesses come out. Especially, I did some work for AstraZeneca, which is a big pharmaceutical company, and they're masters at retroactively fitting after prototyping, because obviously in that world, prototyping is a huge piece when they're testing a new medication. But as things move forward, history often confirms what they suspected in their insight gathering, especially when their product is proven successful and new science is developed and stuff. But I don't want to get too far off piece. And then what happens is, in the life of your product or service, is you start to go round in circles insofar as you've launched your product, used all those lovely comms. Hopefully you've had a really lovely warm response from the market, and that will teach you new stuff. And as your product lives in the market and then the market evolves, especially if you've got an innovative product, because it will be like they'll learn from what you've shown them, then you again need to watch how they respond as an insight gathering tool, have new ideas, prototype new additions or benefits, polish it and relaunch it. And that's essentially who Apple is as a business. They're a really lovely, clean example of a business that follows a design thinking process in that respect. Does that make sense to both of you? Yeah, okay. Anna, I'm going to assume you're nodding as well.
Yes, I am. I've repositioned so I can hear again now. Yeah,
Okay, good. Yeah. I said
you can hear
modest,
me.
but assume I can hear you.
Yeah, good.
Okay, good. So that's again, that's a structure for you to be able to lean into when you need a structure. And especially when you're working with other people, you can say to them, it's so much easier to manage people. And you go, right, we're going to follow a design thinking process. This is the design thinking process we're going to follow. This is the kind of thinking that each stage of that process needs. This is the kind of output that I would like from each of those. Especially millennials, they love that kind of language. They just like to be told what result you want, and then given autonomy, just as a warning. But yeah, okay. So I want to go into So we've talked a bit about innovation culture and the kind of thinking, and I've introduced a tool for that, which is design thinking, and I've given you a kind of rudimentary example of what design thinking is. And again, I encourage you to give it a Google at some point. This is just a very kind of generalized articulation. Different industries have different types of design thinking processes. Some are more complex and longer. Some are, potentially shorter. But I also want to talk about something that you touched on at the beginning, Tony, about I think it was something about the way that certain people work. We're talking about, I know you mentioned about that entrepreneur who has an idea and goes straight in.
And I also, this is the thing that's been on my mind quite a lot, because I've been very precious over 30 years in photography. I've not wanted to do anything that could be perceived badly or anything like that. Yeah. And then this guy, actually, I met him up at his club, and he was a talk by Stephen Bartlett, and it was all about failing fast. He's saying, can't tell you what works, but I can tell you what doesn't work. So I'll put up, if I've got a thumbnail for a podcast, I'll put up 13 different market tests. He's got systems in place to market test the 13 different thumbnails, and they'll go with whichever one failed the least. But not precious about things, Yeah. Obsessive, but not just doing a thing and not worrying about having to hit perfection is quite a revelation to me, and it has taken me a very long time.
Yeah, the thing that I say to some clients that makes them the most nervous is to embrace failure. And the reason is because that language is too loaded. What I mean is, if you're coming from an expansive place, there are learnings throughout every stage of whatever you're doing. And if something isn't working like you want it to, i.e. that could be construed as failure, there are still loads of learnings. Like I said before, if someone says, we tried it before and it didn't work, what has changed since when you tried it? And also, what did you learn from it not working? Let's take the principles of that and build a new idea. And that really is what people mean when they're happy to fail. But again, failure, like a prototype, needs to be cheap and low risk in order to sustain it. I guess, for example, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head for both of you. You've got such different businesses, but I think it's why it's important to remember, and I think I said this as well when we were talking about pitching and presenting, until you publish something, until you launch it into the world, it's still low risk. It's just an extrapolation. It might be time out of your day thinking about it, but even that, I know businesses who spend lots of time thinking about something and then they never launch. There's still so much learning from that they can take into the next thing. All of that thinking is not lost. You just have discovered you've gone up a different avenue. So number one, it teaches you that another avenue might be the right one. That's so that you need to pivot. And I've got a friend who runs a innovation consultants agency, and his favorite word is pivot. He's constantly saying, we didn't fail, we pivoted. And it's kind of language. That's kind of what I guess I want to talk to you about is coming back to the insight gathering part of innovation, and more specifically when somebody commissions you to do something for them, which I don't know is ever going to be part of your businesses, but it could be. And equally, this is just as valuable when you are briefing somebody to do something for your business. So when you need to delegate something, and you might decide it's a copywriter, it's an advertising agency, it's a manufacturer, whatever it is, it's really important to be able to understand how to take and deliver a really strong brief. I'm a bit of a purist, and just as I was around presentation skills and pitching, is to try and get in front of people, which I know is not always possible, but at least try and get in front of them via two dimensions like we are now. just because it's an important part of human psychology around accountability to have some kind of connection with people. But I've got a very kind of simple briefing tool that I want to talk to you about, which could be useful. Anna, shall I just keep talking and then just go when you need to go, or do you need to go now?
I'm here actually, so there's not everybody's. I'm at a networking event
Oh, right.
in the city, and they're not all gathered yet, so I'll just hang on until I sort of see I have to go.
Okay,
It's
fine.
on from now for a couple of hours, so it should be good.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now I just want to ask you a
60
question.
people, so there's only about 10 so far.
Yeah, okay, fine. So it's all filling up. Quite good. So it's actually interesting that you're at a networking event, because this briefing model is based on listening. It's a listening briefing model, and I call it the care model, and it's essentially about taking really good care that you've taken a really big brief. So for me, a brief isn't. And it's, again, you can use this tool on yourself if you're like, I've got an idea, but I don't really know whether it's worth my time to start getting into the insight gathering stage and developing design thinking thing. It's just a little test to make sure that it's an idea. And I generally get an A4 piece of paper and I'll just split it in half. If I can draw that actually quickly. I'll split it in half like this. So it's just got, it's all bloody. So a line down here, and I'll ask someone a nice open question, and I'll capture what they're saying in each of these 4 quadrants. And the 4 subjects that I'm listening out for are context. So why this, why now? Why is it relevant? What's happened? What's changed? What's about to change? What hasn't changed enough recently? So what is the context behind why we're having this conversation, why I've had this idea or thought, why they're commissioning me, why I'm commissioning them? The next one is allies and assassins, and I talked a little bit before about this. So all the people involved, including yourself. So whatever it is we're trying to achieve, who does it benefit? Who's going to be bought into it? Who doesn't want it to work? Who's going to be challenged by it? Who knows lots about it? Who needs to know loads about it? All the people involved, like government agencies, HMRC, just all of the human beings that are involved. Who are the allies and who are the assassins? Who are going to make it easier for you and who are going to block you doing it potentially? And then the bottom one, so there's context, allies and assassins. This one would be resources. So how much time and money is available? How much thinking has already been done about this, and that you can steal and use? This is where I think I talked to you before about a principle of innovation called related worlds, where somebody else in the world has probably already answered your challenge, not your particular product or idea, but say, for example, with Anna, it's about fashion and protection. Where else in the world do those two things have to come together? So are we talking about what are the principles of police uniforms? Are there some principles of that which we can, firemen's uniforms, it's not really fashion, but, you could consider fashion a message that you're sending out to people. It's a policeman's uniform because the colors, because of the silhouette, because of the shape. What are the principles that we can apply to when we're developing our product or service or whatever? So that is a resource. What other thinking in the world has been done? But equally, the people that I'm talking to, what do they know that they don't realize that they know that can be useful to me? And ultimately, how much time and money does everyone have? And the last one is envisioning success. So listen out for what success looks like. So because somebody might brief you and they'll say, well, what we really want is for this restaurant to be built. And I would love that, because so success is 2 bits. It's the thing that they want to happen and why it's beneficial to them. The person who's briefed you, your customer, the one who's giving you the money, essentially, that's still part of your brief. What do they want out of it? And what does actually success look like? And all you do is you just listen and just create bullet points in those 4 areas. Context, and because it won't come out at you in any order. They'll just come at you with the answer to that question, and you'll just start pulling it into those different areas. And the reason that you pull it out into those 4 areas, or you listen in those different areas, is because one of those 4 quadrants might be heavier or lighter than the others. And that will tell you that person, or you, if you're doing this, using this tool on yourself, has done a lot of thinking in one area and maybe not enough in another area. So it means that you can start going in with more direct questions or more direct thinking if you're using this tool on yourself around one of those areas. It could be that you've got lots of energy around why, but not enough thought has been happened on, well, what does it look like? How do I know that? What do I actually want? It could be that you know loads about the resource, you understand why this thing needs to happen, you've got a really clear idea of what it looks like if we've done it well, but you've no idea who's involved in it and all the different relationships that you're going to need to consider in order to make sure it survives and is successful. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Because I developed this tool because what I noticed was happening a lot with different people that I would work with, and sometimes myself, is that someone would come at you with a brief, and it's not well thought out because they don't have time to think it out, and you are the one that holds the area of expertise in your field. They don't. They just understand that you do something that they have a feeling was probably useful to them. But you understand all the context behind all the different ways that what you produce can be used and be beneficial. So what you're doing is you're stimulating their thinking and getting a much clearer 360-degree brief to make sure that when you start moving through potentially a design thinking process, you're really working off the right brief. Because if you don't, what will happen is you'll do this whole project and you'll come at them with the answer to the brief that they gave you, and it will just be stimulus for the brief that they should have given you in the first place, and they'll blame you for not taking a proper brief, not for not giving you a proper one. So it's quite... I
definitely agree with resources as well, because it's just so important. You know, I can remember going to meetings, and you know, until you dig right down into, you know, you say, well, have you thought about a budget for this?
Yeah.
And then they say a figure that it's like 10 times what you actually thought they were.
Yeah.
You know, because they don't have any clue about how to solve the problem. And it completely, you know, opens lots of doors for what you can do for them if they're quite happy to do that. And you know, sometimes just listening and following these certainly the resources one is important, but actually just listening to their problem and taking the whole brief. I've gone in with a portfolio and never even opened it in certain,
right,
you know, in good listening sessions.
Yeah.
You know, if they think you've actually got it by asking these questions, then quite often you end up with the job because they can tell you got it. And, you know, it's not a whole case of open your portfolio and look at 10 people.
Yeah.
You know, if they're confident, because you've asked those questions or listened, it works. But the resources one is really important, I think.
Yeah. And the first thing that you've done as well by doing this, by insisting that you get an opportunity to what I call interrogate the brief, but that language might not be something they want to hear, is you've supported their thinking. So you're immediately adding value and making sure that you're getting a really thorough response, as much as people are able to give you. And again, you can use this tool on yourself and go, oh, this is an interesting place. I've not thought about this. Sit down and go, right, why am I thinking about this now? Why do I think it's a relevant idea now? Thinking about all the different people that could be and should be involved in it. And sometimes I've done this with different ideas I've had about products and services, and I think, damn, I've got a much more useful network than I realized. And then they become a resource. But then I might be like, well, I've got no time to do this fantastic idea. So I've either got to make time or, you know, wait for my schedule to open up. And also clear about the impact that you're trying to have. So envisioning what success looks like. I know I've nailed this because ... It can be a really useful way. And actually, sometimes it can be quite a nice thing. So you sat on a train, you know, you're just daydreaming. I now listen instinctively to when people are telling me something, I listen in these 4 quadrants, and I start to ask questions if I think I'm not hearing enough from one of them, because I found them to be really, really useful, insofar as in making sure that what I'm working from is a real brief. And there's even been times where I've done this, especially when it comes to a learning and development point of view. I've sat down with clients and had the chat about, just said, well, why are we talking about this now? And why is it relevant now? What's changing in the business? Blah, blah, blah. And then eventually I've taught myself out of a piece of work because they've just not thought about it. And they've got all the resources and the things that they need. But I'd rather that than me go in and then realize that afterwards. It's that thing we talked about around, is it a real sale? And is it a good one? I don't want to go, I don't want them to do any more thinking. I want to take their money, and for them to realize when I've left, they could have just done that themselves anyway. That's not what's useful to me, because if I have come in and I've supported them in this, then they will remember that I deliver that service, and they'll come back to me later when they do have a real brief. It's just a bit of professional integrity, if that makes sense. Any questions on what we talked about so far? I feel like I'm rumbling through things quite quickly, but I want to make sure that you've got at least a starter for 10 around the thinking around some of the things I'm talking about. Is there anything that I've talked about that you're thinking, okay, I can see a potential challenge? Because there is another chunk that I want to move into before I wrap it up.
I'll give it a go, and I don't suppose I can tell you about it because it's the last session, isn't it? But is there a channel? There's a question. Is there a channel we can use
for these
4 listening quadrants?
Oh, right. Do you mean as far as like a digital tool?
Well, more practically, because you just said, are there any questions around that piece? And I'm thinking, well, I haven't used it before. I'll give it a go.
Yeah.
Now, tonight.
Yeah.
And any feedback, give you later. But is there a channel for
that? No, and I don't think I understand what you mean by channel, Anna. Do you mean like a way to discuss whether there is how useful it is, or how any responses you've had from it?
Yeah, just in using it in practice.
Well, I mean, I'd encourage you to try it with each other. I also encourage you to talk to other people about it and then say, I'm going to try this. And I also, you're both more than welcome again to email me.
Okay, email, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
Because I know that we can talk to Mayim about this, but they do mentoring, and I think, I'm not sure, but you should be able to get a couple of hours worth of mentoring.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to email you guys afterwards and just give you the information about mentoring. So
thank you.
The opportunities there, you've got the facility. So personally, I would definitely take it. But I'll email you after this session with all the details.
Yeah, better from the horse's mouth than me mumbling my way through. I really understand it. But for both of you, if there's LSB, you've got a bunch of amazing mentors, and it'd be great to focus what you really need information on, because it's 2 1-hour sessions. But that said, I feel like I can definitely talk you through any of the stuff that we've talked about, apart from Joseph's session. And also, Anna, with you, I can talk to you a lot about crowdfunding if you decide to go down that route as well, because I know a fair bit about that as well.
That would be brilliant. I've really tried to find through Make It British, London South Bank, a few other groups, people who've got experience in it, and keep getting a blank. So that'd be brilliant. Yes, please.
Yeah, no worries. What was I going to say? But we can get into all those things. But with any of these tools and stuff, commercially, half an hour chat doesn't really affect me too much, as long as I don't have too many of them. So I'm always happy to jump on a Zoom as long as I've got time. If you try these tools, there are people from the last cohort that I literally had a chat with someone the other day who was trying something, and I was like, right, let's go back through some of the stuff we talked about. And it's amazing how much you can cover in half an hour. And because I'm really passionate about your businesses being able to have the best chance possible to succeed. But I want to talk, the last bit that I want to talk about is around the process of how to run a really effective idea generation session. So of the design thinking process, the insight idea gen, and that's when you're not just popping out with ideas randomly, but when you want to have focused ideas about a certain area of your business or product or service. Or even if someone else comes to you and says, I love your thinking and the way you look at your part of the industry, can you help me come up with ideas because of the way that you do it? So this is about idea generation facilitation, and it works on a couple of levels. It works on the tools of how to do it, and it also works on how to manage creativity productively. So if you're in front of anyone, including yourself, and you're like, I want to take this spark of thought and I want to put it into the world in a way that means I can walk away and do something with it. And I've got a question for both of you, and I don't know if you want to be able to answer, but what do you think is the difference between a thought and an idea?
It's an idea, something you maybe act on. Well, they're both, you could act on them, both of them, but that's the similarity, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
an idea is more is like a collection of thoughts, really, isn't it? It's just more fleshed out.
Yeah. In a nutshell, that's exactly it. I guess I think I mentioned dust to matter. Well, you're doing the insight piece of the design thinking process, so that you do the insights to gather dust, so you can build those into matter in idea generation. And the lines are blurred, but put simply, an idea is something that you can actually do. And even more, I'd say it's something that you can explain to somebody who wasn't anywhere near your insights or your ideas, and they can actually do. So an idea is something that doesn't need context to be able to make happen in a reductive sense. Context is useful, but it doesn't need it to happen. And I give you an example of what I mean. I could say that my idea is that we all need to get more exercise to be healthier. That's the challenge, is wellness. And I'm like, right, let's all get more exercise. And my idea is we go running. It's still just a thought until I say Tuesday afternoons at 3:00, we're going to go for a half an hour run independently. And then we're going to compare our runs on our digital devices or whatever to see how well we're doing, and we'll track how we go. That's an idea. It doesn't need every single piece of detail, but it needs enough detail so that I could say it to somebody who wasn't in this conversation, and I could say exactly what I just said, and they could join in on our idea because it's got enough of the fundamentals there. If I just said we're all going to go for a run once a week, they'll be like, what time? How do we know we've gone for the run? What day? It still has the same impact, but it's just, as Tony, as you said, it's fleshed out a bit more. And the reason why it's important when you're in the idea generation process of whatever you're doing to be clear about a thought and an idea is because lots of people out there are building businesses off thoughts and not actual ideas. The idea comes later. They don't follow a design thinking process. They're like, I've got a thought. Eating more vegetables is good for you. Right, let's make a business. Launch. And they're not really developing things. You just have to keep coming back and going through all those different processes one way or another. The checks and balances, essentially, doing your due diligence. Why not just do it at the beginning and just be clear about the ideas that you're having? And again, I never want you to switch off ideas because they all have value. The key is to make sure you're clear about what is an idea and what isn't. And the best way to do that is to talk to somebody else about it and get them to tell you back what they've heard, because they'll tell you whether it's an idea or not. And if and you'll know that it's not because they'll ask you questions. Well, what time would we do that? Oh, well, but what would that be made out of? It means you haven't explained it as an idea. And it is the kind of opposite to the 6-second pitch where you want people to ask questions. An idea is something you want them to go, okay, I get it. And now you can start talking about the bigger picture. But ultimately, So I say that because I think it's useful for you to build those parameters. The thing about innovation is it's a balance between playfulness and discipline. The playfulness is being expansive. The discipline is, have I had an idea? And then part of that discipline is it time to move on to another idea? Because you can always come back to these ideas and flesh them out and Franken idea them and chop things up, put things together. When you're being expansive, it's like, otherwise what you end up with is an Uber idea. So now I've got a vegan, portable business that also fixes swimming pools so people are healthier. Too much. So I'm going to sneeze. And it's just a bit of a practice. And I kind of challenge you both, I guess Anna as well, this evening, is listen out for when people discuss things, whether they've popped out, because ideas can become perfectly formed, they just come out, or they need working on. It's a bit like when someone says, I've got a question, and they make a statement. Often people say, I've got an idea, and what they mean is I've got a thought, which is interesting, and it's still valuable. And what I would do if I'm facilitating an idea generation session and somebody says, I've got an idea, and they come out with a thought, I will now support them in molding that thought into an idea, because it's the starter for 10. It's some dust. Let's build it into matter. Let's bring, more. Tony.
I have express a thought.
Yeah.
For Anna.
Yeah.
Anna, have you been to the tropical diseases hospitals or units and asked them, because I know that they test out, they've got like huge pens full of mosquitoes and such like. Have you
Yeah, they're the only lab in Europe.
I
have reached out to them several times, but they're very reluctant to put their name down on stuff. They're very laboratory thinking. And of course, nothing protects you 100% right. So maybe they just think we need to find out more about the diseases themselves rather than protection items to prevent them.
Okay.
It's a really interesting...
Not giving up, though. Not giving up.
It's an interesting thought around allyship, isn't it? Because that's when I talk about allies and assassins, perfect example. Where do they sit, and how can you make them an assassin to an ally? They'll tell you what they need from you, and if they need you to be, medically certified, that's what it takes. So they're ever going to really be an ally. But yeah, it's an interesting thought. I find, especially when I'm around people that understand this process, because we've worked in innovation for a long time, the conversation goes quite quickly. I've got a thought. Can you help me make it into an idea? And it's just a type of language, and it rapidly get into it. But we're not saying words that people don't understand. They're just open to interpretation. So if you sit down with one other person and say, I need someone to bounce some ideas off of, what you're really saying is I need someone to bounce some thoughts off of to create an idea. And what I mean by an idea is this, and just explain the difference. And then the type of thinking I think is useful is yes and thinking, not how to. And what that looks like is this: just land it with a nice baseline context, and then you're off. And you can really, really get so much out of somebody else when it comes to simple challenges. Micro innovations can be really answered quickly if you just set it up in a way that creates a nice structured discipline for playfulness. I'll give you a metaphor for that, because I know it sounds like a contradiction, but creative energy or innovative energy in thinking for me is a bit like a pinball machine. So you want the ball to go anywhere on that table it needs to, or wants to, whatever speed it wants to, and your job is just to keep it alive. But the ball can't do that unless the table has sides and a top. So the brief, the thing that you've discovered from the insights that you gathered, which has created a real brief for you, that's your sides and the top. And the playfulness of coming up with ideas is going, great, is that on brief? Yes, it is on brief. Or no, it's slightly off brief. What can we take from it expansively to get it more on brief? Yeah. So being clear about the difference between a thought and idea, and then sniffing out the difference is a really nice skill to learn, especially when you're collaborating with anyone, because they won't use language. People use definite language. They don't use They use definite language that is open to interpretation. They don't use precise language unless you explain to them. This is what, for the sake of this conversation, this is what I mean. The other major point about idea generation is capture, and it's one of the most important things when it comes to productive creativity. And I know this is going to sound almost patronizing, but unless you capture the idea or an idea when you've had one, it's just been a nice conversation you'll forget. It's so important, and it's useful to develop your own capture tools, but there's also a discipline around capture, and that is, don't write anything down until you've had the idea, because otherwise what you'll end up with is loads of waffle. You'll write down all the thoughts and the idea will be lost in it. So if I'm running an idea generation session, which could be 6 people, it could be me walking around the building with someone for half an hour. What I'm doing is I'm listening for the idea to pop out there. We should all be healthy. Like, ideas for wellness, brief. We should all go running once a week. Thought, build it into an idea. We should go running on Tuesdays. We should log it on our devices. We should compare it to each other, and we should track our success. Idea, capture. Write that down. Don't write anything else down until you get to that point. And then play it back to the person. This is the idea we've come up with. Have you got any builds? At that point, what they might do is start having new thoughts about a different idea. So your job, again, is to listen out for the difference in a thought and idea. Or it's just to capture any last bullet points, which will make it clear that that is the idea.
Your idea is very similar to a plan, right? But it's a plan because it's an idea because it's for testing, presumably. Is that what you mean?
No, I feel like that's a few stages on. I'm talking about just the simple capturing the core of the idea and making sure that you've captured it accurately so that it can be worked.
Okay, sorry. I meant the difference between the thought and the idea. Because the idea is really, as you're saying, it's really a plan, isn't it? But it's because it's early workings. So it's more of a test plan kind of thing.
Do you know what? So I wouldn't say that it is a plan. No. I don't think you're wrong. I just think the way we're going is to part of the reductive process. And initially, when you're still trying to keep the discipline of getting that idea fully formed and out, so you can move on to another one, because you can have 5 to 15 different ideas around the same challenge or different parts of that challenge. It's about making sure that the juice is worth the squeeze, and you've got enough out so that you can dig into it later with a more reductive filter. It's just about what is it? So I've got this. I had this old boss, and he loved putting when it was an idea that was about products. He was obsessed with chili, and even though he was the boss and he ran an innovation agency, he couldn't not have a chili version of everything. He'd be like, "Oh, deodorant, chili version. Oh, like bubble bath, chili version." I don't know why he was obsessed, but it was a really good learning for everyone, because it was like, until he gets his chili version out, he can't free his mind up to have other ideas. And this is what I mean about make sure that your idea is fully formed, get it out, because it will free you up to start making new connections still about the same thing. So you end up with like 2 or 15 really great innovative ideas, or really innovative ideas that can be built or reductively made or chopped up and put together. But ultimately they're actual things, they're singular things. And you've captured them in the way that just captures the essence of them as an idea. And I know there's a slight contradiction between me saying, oh, well, the brief is wellness and we're going to go for a jog once a week, and then me saying, and that's not an idea, that's a thought, but me saying we go on a Tuesday afternoon and we align our digital devices and then compare them and track each other. That's sounding like a more complex version of the same idea. There's a thought built into an idea, and then we just want to stop there. We don't want to build that. We don't want to get into the reductive side of how we then make that happen. Because again, if you try to do both at the same time, you cancel them out. So what you would do after another reason why capture is so important when you're having an idea session is so that you can come back to it the next day or later that afternoon and start running all these ideas through a reductive filter. And that's where you start making a plan. And that's where you start going, right, well, how viable is this? And a reductive filter often will just have, I mean, I run this as a workshop a little while ago for a mortgage advisory business about just by the nature of those businesses, everyone works quite independently because there's lots of brokers under one business. But they wanted to be more included in the business and have more of ownership of the business that they all worked in. So I ran a day of ideas around, after doing some insight work with every individual person in the business. I interviewed them all individually, as about 15 to 20 people, asked them about their life at the business, what do they want in the future, where does it sit, got some insights, figured that there were some platforms for ideas. They were all interested in working remotely, as in abroad remotely. Could they have some time doing that? They're all interested around, when you get to the top of your qualifications as an advisor, can you take ownership of different parts of the business? They were all interested in things like, can I open my own, can we expand this brand and have other kind of franchise maybe, et cetera, et cetera. Could we create shortcuts around some of the I can't think of the word now, regulations around this business? So little platforms came out of me interviewing them, and then we had an idea generation session with I got them in little teams, and they followed this process that I'm talking you through now. Another thing was to have a facilitator, one person doing what I'm doing, which is sniffing out thoughts and ideas, supporting everybody else to make sure they land in an idea, not a thought, capturing it really well, putting it to one side, moving on to the next one. And then at the end of the day, everyone went home, and me and the boss and one other sat in the boardroom, and we created a reductive filter, which was 5 things. So is it an idea or thought? How disciplined were they in the process that we went through? Because people are people. So is it actually an idea? Another one was, is it commercially viable? So would it make the business money? So we were talking about people working abroad. Could it still make them business money? Could do. Could make them more money. Another one was, is it does it fit regulation? So is it legally something they could do? So we just had like 5 different things, and we just went through all the ideas and just ticked them or crossed them. It was that, it wasn't that. And then we took the ideas that had ticks on, and then we started to make plans about those ideas. That's when we looked at the ideas that were like, these now have passed, they're expansive, they've been pushed further. The thinking's been pushed further than we've ever done before. We've come up with an idea. We've checked whether it can actually be an idea. And now we're going to start creating a plan around it. And all of the ideas that had crosses on them that didn't fit through the reductive filter, we then did another exercise a week later, which was an expansive exercise, which is, what do these ideas need to make them fit the filter? Because we've got a new developed brief. Does that make sense? So you're not wrong. You're just, your brain's moving fast into the next stage, which is exciting. You have an idea, you're like, can we make it happen? But that's the bit where innovation has an element of discipline around it. Because the truth is, if you don't follow these processes, or not these processes, but if you don't make sure that your ideas are robust through following a process, which gives them a chance to breathe, but then also puts them solidly in the real world, they'll immediately not survive. Especially in a world where, a reductive world, where people want to rip your ideas to shreds. Because that's what people are like. Does that make sense? Do either of you have any questions about everything that I've just been rabbiting on about?
Just a thought. With AI, do you think it's getting more important to be speaking in a precise way rather than kind of chat, conversational way?
You mean in so far as briefing AI, Anna?
Yeah. I'm thinking, next generation are probably going to be better at it than us.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, do we have to pivot more quickly, do you think, because of this?
Yeah, I think it's a really lovely question. And actually thinking about it, where AI, I think at its current stage can be really useful is because essentially if you give it a brief, it'll look at the entire internet and spit out the things that you should be focused on. So as far as your initial insight gathering piece, it can be really useful depending on the clever questions you ask it. You ask AI, can you tell me, write me a couple of paragraphs on the age at which people start to wear, young people get interested in fashion. What age do we start to develop around the world? Immediately you're going to get a really precise piece of insight, which has looked at the entire internet. Amazing. That's going to shorten your insight process massively. Again, it's only what the internet already knows, and that's okay, because when we talked about insight,
I take issue with that. Sorry, I take issue with that because I don't believe that's what AI is. Certainly not from my experience. It's not just scraping the internet. Certainly, ChatGPT 4, the new model, I've run various things through it, and it clearly understands the process. It understands what all these different things are. Like, it understands what 3D models are, what information can be attached, and what usefulness it can extrapolate, what usefulness that is to all kinds of organizations and things, which is not written about because it doesn't even exist yet. I mean, it's not even being used for that yet, but it can extrapolate out, it will be useful for these people. So I got about 50 use cases for, I stopped at 50, I'm 50 something. First of all, it gave me like a dozen, and I went expand, and they were good too, most of them. A couple of 3 weren't, and then I expanded again, and I was like, 50 is enough. That it's more than real estate and construction, and maybe a little bit of hospitality and restaurant. It's a huge number of things, and it could list the benefits, and you could tunnel down into it. So I don't think it's been written about. I really think it actually does understand on some level the process, maybe better even than humans.
So
but that's just
just
my thing with it. So that's my experience.
Yeah, and that's the whole point, isn't it? Is that any tool is only as useful as how well you understand it. I feel like the information and focused information is always going to be useful in a design thinking process if one of the resource issues you have is time, which most of us have, and knowledge. As I would say that as far as insight gathering is concerned, there are lots of different types of insight. As I sort of touched on at the beginning, there's data, there's quantitative and qualitative. There's also instinct, which is potentially where AI can't really help you. But in lots of other ways it can. And it also depends on what you're really working on, I suspect, and what your focus is on. You could, depending on the AI, maybe you could ask it to design you a prototype on your product or service, and ask it to make it cheap, the cheapest version and the low risk version. Its interpretation of low.
Yeah, I have done that, but it kind of assumes I've got root access to the manufacturer's websites and systems, which
yeah.
I wonder if it would come up with a piece of paper and a bed sheet, which is what I used for my first prototype.
It is good though. I mean, it really is. You can run all sorts of stuff through it, and it's like to me, using the AI, first off, it will give you a really banal answer. I can't answer that, and if you just keep on at it, I'm sure you can be something useful about this. Sure, it will only completely shut you down. It will go, I cannot guarantee this, and I don't know, I'm guessing, kind of thing, but it will. I don't think it's worth persisting.
Well, our knowledge of AI is developing, isn't it? And our understanding is developing. I feel like if anything can create shortcuts for you, which are reliable shortcuts that you can really stand by, then great. when it comes to innovation, there is always that question of taking existing things and making a brand new. They say there's no such thing as new ideas. That's I think what there is new connections around ideas, and there's new relevances around ideas. For now, my instinct is it still needs a human touch, because we're not just talking about data and kind of captured information. We're also talking about instinct, being quite a large piece of, essentially, innovation has energy behind it. So anyway, but there's the thing to play with. I think I encourage everyone I talk to have a play with their AI, because it has different relevances for different people around different parts of their businesses, and it's still growing and learning and developing. But yeah,
I mean, the background that I've got up here, I created using using Photoshop Beta, and I just said London, Matterport, digital, skyline, something like that. I just went, and it created 3 versions, and then I was like, first versions were not London, but I was like, you can have the Thames and then skyline, and then the idea of digital information, and then I've got dozens of these. It took about half an hour, 40 minutes. It took half an hour, and I probably spent an hour on it because it was fun.
Yeah.
But I was done after an hour.
So there's a principle of innovation is stimulus, because you can get to a point of, there might be a part of your business that needs new thinking around it, new innovation around it, and it's not a very interesting part, or it's a bit of a dry part, or it could be a part that you're so well versed around that you feel like you've had every idea possible, and that's where you'll need to stimulate your thinking and to push it in a new place. And it's where it's easy to be less linear, or it serves you to be less linear in your thinking, in order to think about how you need to be stimulated a bit more. And that's where, maybe AI could help you design some stimulus around things like that. So there's another principle of design of innovation, which is random links. And that's where you say you're working on a project where you're trying to create a new restaurant, and you're like, right, I've got my AirPods and a mug, 2 random things. How are they linked? And then you just kind of analyze it, and you're like, right, well, they both provide a service. One distracts me and one nourishes me. So suddenly I'm like, right, so that's a principle, distraction and nourishment. Can I have an idea around a restaurant that nourishes me and distracts me at the same time? There's so many different ways that you can come at innovation, and you could ask AI to create random things, just pictures for you, and you just start. It's a useful muscle to learn to use, which I think you're already using. I think it's impossible to be in the position you're both in without using it already. But it's quite useful to give it the respect that it deserves, and recognize that that you're making these random connections, or these new connections, and that you can keep doing it and apply it to the rest of your business.
One little question: does it know who you are and what you do?
What, AI?
Yeah. Have you asked it?
Me personally?
Yeah, like how you used to Google yourself and you'd come up with...
I don't know. I've not asked. I should ask, actually. Somebody said to me, Doug,
yeah.
And I'm...
Well, I asked it and it didn't know. And I asked it what a Mozzie Cozzie was, it didn't know. So I taught it.
Oh, that's interesting. How did you teach it then?
It gave me the answers, and then I said, this is correct, but this is actually not correct. And then it corrected itself. It thought I was from Australia, and now it knows I'm a British entrepreneur. Things like that. You can just tweak it. So it's...
What platform did you go on to ask it that question in the first place?
I use Claude.
Claude.
But I'm thinking, because they're not connected, I should go on the other 3, right? Do the same before somebody else makes up some bullshit about it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
could
well,
really sabotage someone's business, right?
yeah, it's
All
going
my
to be
competitors, I'm
regurgitated.
thinking.
God, that's not. I didn't even think about AI like saboteurs. That's a really good
Yeah.
point. Now I'm paranoid. Now I'm going to have to get on it. Thanks, Anna.
Welcome.
I mean, it does come up with. They do come up with some very crazy stuff.
Mm.
It's certainly going to be scary for a lot of people in the future. But right now, it's a big help for if you haven't got a huge team and you want to get
Yeah.
stuff written. It's really pretty amazing.
Yeah, I had a client session just before this one, and who's a property developer, and we talked about the difference between using AI and a copywriter, and the difference was user experience. Her preference was to speak to a person and have that person I've built a relationship with her, so understand what she means by certain things, and then be able to have a discussion about it till the copy is correct. And how, because I was saying about ChatGPT can be really useful as a kind of a first sort of burst, and then you can run it through. You can ghostwrite it yourself and put a more human. And she was like, I just don't need that. I need to speak to somebody, and I want to pay for it. And I want she wasn't being a traditionalist. It was just about, I need that person to connect with what I'm saying. I don't want to connect with what it's saying. So it just depends on how you work, doesn't it?
I quite like saying something quite succinct and then say expand, and then just go less of this, more of this, and you've done quite a lot in the space of a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think it's like any tool; it can help create shortcuts and focus if you understand the tool well or well enough, and use it in a way that serves you properly. But when we're talking about innovation, I feel like that tool can be useful in stages of the design thinking process. But again, it's about really landing the thinking as a foundation for making new connections, and not just taking the low-hanging fruit around I
think you've got to be very precise.
Sorry, Tony. What's the obvious place to put your head? Because the whole point of innovation is to push past your obvious. It's a bit like algorithms. Sometimes it'd be nice to just turn them off so that you could get shown random things that you might never experience to create new tastes, as opposed to just having your taste constantly confirmed, for example. So again, really great tools, definitely worth playing with. And can create shortcuts, especially when you're a small business like you guys and you don't have huge teams. But again, business is all about relationships, and I encourage you to have conversations with lots of different people about a lot of the stuff that we've covered over these, because again, this is one person's knowledge. Peer-to-peer learning is always going to push your learning much more forward than I could test things and discuss things with other people. Is there anything from the other 3 sessions that I've run that you have any final kind of questions around that you want to air before we wrap things up?
We've now got the recordings, access to the recordings, so I'm going to be going back over
Cool.
pitch deck one and using that when it's appropriate.
Yeah, great. I might get the recording of Joseph's session, so that, because I've got an outline of what he was going to talk about, but it's interesting to see how you've responded to what he was talking about, especially if either of you end up I pick you up as a mentor. I would be useful for me to be able to align with that. And I'm not sure if Joseph can be a mentor. He might be able to be, if that's an area that you really need a lot more support in. But I guess that's conversation for another time. Anything else before I wrap things up for both of you? Any lingering questions?
Not so much questions, but just thank you so much. And I really found it helpful. I'm going to use quite a bit. You've seen a couple of emails from me already, but I will circle back once I've had a bit of thinking time.
Yeah. bit of reflection and landing. And like Tony says, the videos will be useful because your mind will go to the most useful things, but then things will move on, and then other things might be useful. But
Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that, Anna. Thank you.
Well, you know, I've been on quite a few of these, and you've really come up with some different stuff and making me think differently and imagine running a business differently.
Great.
Thank you.
Good news. That's good news. I appreciate it.
The design thinking in the marketing is actually quite a good. I mean, it works for me because I really have struggled with this whole channels idea.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking from this that I'm gonna fail fast, go out and structure it, record it, fail or succeed, go with whatever's best.
Yeah.
But to keep the core idea of what its why is, and all that stuff, and try and convey those thoughts through different channels. So between you, yes, thank you so much. It's really been, and I have done a lot of other things too that have been, it's got me to a place where I think I can move. It might not be right, but I can do that. And if it don't work, do something else.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know, and everything's ultimately a punt. I just think it's really important to it's just nice to have stimulus and new space, new thinking. If you want change to happen, you have to do new thinking, and there are so many different options out there. And I really encourage both of you. You've got such interesting businesses, and they're so completely different. I really encourage both of you to look at people who've been in a similar space to you and think about that principle of related worlds that I talked about. It's not, I'm not talking about necessarily competition. I'm talking about people who are in a similar spaces of you, or ultimately trying to have a similar impact to you, like either for Tony, making things real for people, and for Anna, making things accessibly protective. Do you know what I mean? It's just that both those spaces are really interesting. And be creative about how people are answering those challenges, and let it stimulate your thinking.
Brilliant. I better get in there actually, because there's quite a group of people with similar challenges in sustainable fashion right now. Yeah, wicked. It's full actually. I'm glad.
Okay, yeah, I hope it goes really well, Anna.
Thanks a lot. I'll be in touch. Cheers.
Right, take care.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Tony. Yeah, keep in touch. Bye.
Likewise. So yeah, no, it's good because I haven't got a huge load. I haven't got resources, to do the traditional marketing thing. To go down one route is as risky. It is probably more likely to be successful.
Yeah,
it's one. I don't really know which error will break. So I think, as I say, between you, you've given me something that I can do.
Good.
And I know you're right, but I will. When I've got more people, I'll be able to do that, but I can't.
Yeah, and also, the knowledge that I've shared is based on seeing lots of different across industries, all different sorts of projects, and the things that in the short space of time that we have to discuss it tend to work the best. But your journey is completely yours individually, Tony. Do you know what I mean? It will be, you've got the great thing is you've got an amazing product. You've got something that's going to create appetite in people. You just have to, make sure that you serve it up in a way that is accessible to them and that they can enjoy. Simple as that, really.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, listen, again, contact me if you I've got questions and stuff, and if I've got free halves now, I'm always happy to jump on calls. Have you got any last questions at all for either of us?
No, I think I'm good. It'd be good to do. I think I need to reconnect. What I probably need next is a developer.
Right.
So I know that parts of the program do have, PhD students, and they have other resources. So I've got a fairly precise brief from the people who make the meat in the modelled software.
Yeah.
And they've now spun that out, that if I can get the API key from, which I think I can, there's a lot of things going on together. I mean, I've got to sign a contract at some point soon, in which case everything unlocks. But it's a little bit of a game of, you know, it's dominoes really.
Yeah. I mean, my advice is to use every single resource available, because it's all going to give you something you didn't have before.
Tony, I was going to say that we potentially could give you one of our students, one of our grads from MSP as well. They could probably help you get the ball rolling, and then at least you got a starter for 10. And then
I think it'll be a really good project for them. It'd be great for me, but basically the software will be free form, so it'd be able to customize it to different industries. So the meeting and the model part of it, you know, in terms of where the windows go, and there's various different layers of interactivity, and you can build it and you can take it where you like. So the underlying core thing is solid, but the way it's implemented and displayed is completely free form, or it's going to be in the next model. So I've been working with the developers in Brazil, and
I don't know who that is.
I know there should be people.
I was going to say, drop me an email next week, and I can probably see if there's any sort of grads who can assist you. I'm sure we can get, say, 50 to 70 hours of a grad to support you in developing it. So drop me a note next week, and I'll start looking for someone who can give you that support.
Well, that'd be absolutely brilliant, because I already have hosting. Anyway, we can sort those details out.
Yep, super.
It's been a real pleasure, Tony. Thanks ever so much for all your energy. I really appreciate it.
No, it's been good. I'm very positive about a way through now. At least something I can try.
Yeah, good, great. Start for 10. That'll do. All right, Tony.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, Tony. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
See you later.